Got to talk about this crop of rookies from the draft in 2015. I mean, we've been talking about Karl-Anthony Towns, Kristaps Porzingis. We've talked about them nonstop for the last few months. But the thing about this draft is that it is just so miraculously deep. Some people are comparing it to 84 already. Justin, you were in Phoenix last week. You got to see Devin Booker play with your own eyes.
Whoa.
Talk about him.
Devin Booker, to me, reminds me of a more versatile Klay Thompson, which is pretty high praise in my opinion. The kid can shoot the lights out. He has a feel for the moment. The Suns, I watched them against the Raptors. He was a big part of them kind of rallying and challenging the Raptors at the end of the game. I believe he had about 30 points. Hitting three after three. He can put the ball on the floor, finish with contact, and he can run the point. They have him run the point, especially with their guards being out with injury. So you're talking about a really versatile player, whereas Klay Thompson, utilizes screens, great off-ball player, catch and shoot guy. But I think Booker has a little bit more of the full package that a lot of people criticize Klay Thompson for not having, I should say.
Phil, what guy stands out to you? I mean, there's so many.
I mean, this is a tough situation for me. I love the rookie classes. Every year, this is one that stands out to me big time. Bobby Portis of the Bulls, big time. I mean, I love that Devin Booker is getting a spotlight. I called him from day one. He'd have a good opportunity there. Cameron Payne with OKC has been having good of a run. Obviously, Myles Turner deserves a lot of spotlight right now, playing his way into the starting role. The Indiana Pacers, who are in a playoff position, right? So it's no small feat. Frank Vogel has been very vocal about wanting him in the lineup early, kind of like they did with Paul George years back, to give him that experience. So when they get into the playoffs, he's not kind of a deer caught in the headlights. I mean, there are so many. I mean, Willie Cauley-Stein is playing fantastic basketball right now. I mean,
when he gets on the court, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but there's just so many guys. I mean, the one guy you don't hear much about, who I don't know who could have called this, Frank Kaminsky, but I think there's honestly like 12 to 14 deep of really nice players and another 5 to 10 of really useful players. The two guys were very similar players in different situations. I think Stanley Johnson and Justice Winslow deserve a lot of credit in kind of a quieter role of what they've been able to do on their teams as well, both defensively and offensively.
Justin, I'm gonna throw this at you, Justin. The 41st pick hasn't been mentioned yet. The Joker, Nikola Jokic, has just been killing it lately. What do you think of this guy?
He's really, really impressive. Again, watched Raptors Nuggets, not in person that time, but oh my God, like he was just abusing them, and like he's a big that he blocks shots. He has a feel for the game. He has like flashes of Vlade Divac, his passing. He can stretch the floor out. He's tough, finishes with contact. This is a really, really talented center. And Denver really has a neat international thing going on. They have a lot of European players in that, and I find that really interesting. Both him and Yusuf Nurkic, who was kind of a revelation last year, you're talking about two really good international centers there. They got a fun thing going on in Denver. I don't think Denver is as bad as their record. They're just fairly young. I think they're well coached. And it's kind of fun to see these bigs develop, get a bit of a defensive identity, although that's probably a few years away. But he's a really impressive, well-rounded center, which in a league where you can make a career if you can walk and chew gum at the same time, if you're 7 feet tall, I think he's going to have a place in this league for a long time.
Well, if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, let's hope that last statement is true, or they've got no future.
Yeah, we haven't really spoken about Okafor. Phil, I mean, how's he feel to you lately?
Okafor's kind of been doing what we expected. I mean, he can score the basketball. He's a very dexterous person. He can handle the ball with both sides. He has trouble hitting free throws, and he's not the best defender in the game. I mean, he's pretty lucky he has Nerlens Noel next to him. I think he kind of is what it is. I mean, Justin and I were kind of arguing this all off season on his ceiling. I think he is exactly who we thought he'd be. I'm not actually that surprised by him. I thought he had a legit skill set, and he's given tons of minutes and tons of shots to do that skill set. I'm not actually surprised at all. He's shown he's incredibly talented, and to me, it's can he shore up those other things that to me are going to make the difference of him being a fun player who can have some skills to a dominant NBA star.
And yeah, I completely agree with all that. I think if this were a few years ago, he'd probably be the front runner for Rookie of the Year because it used to just be a counting stats thing. I think the voters are becoming a little more educated on the subject and really looking for a team context there. He's an incredibly gifted scorer. As far as centers go and post scoring, his footwork, it's so polished already. He just needs to work on the defensive rebounding, his defense in general. And I think he's going to have a future. But with Philly being kind of the disaster that it is, I think a lot of his production is getting overshadowed or overlooked, especially when we look back a couple of years where Philly really had both Evan Turner and Michael Carter-Williams had these elevated stats. I remember Indiana traded for Evan Turner, 20-point-per-game scorer, and the guy couldn't do anything for them. So I think people are a little bit cautious about kind of players being looters in a riot, so to speak, in Philly.
Phil, if you could pick one guy that really hasn't been mentioned much in this conversation who you think really is going to be a good player, solid player, 5-10 years down the road.
Hasn't been mentioned much. I'm trying to think. Just let me get back to this page because we mentioned a bunch of guys right off the bat. Hadn't been mentioned. Well, technically, you haven't mentioned Karl-Anthony Towns, but I think that's a bit of a cheat.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, considering his PER for his development at this stage, is something that I think almost gets over. Like, is it possible that he's one of the best players in the league already? Like, okay, one of the best players, like top 40, 50, and he's just not getting the credit for it. But also actually say, yeah.
Oh, for sure. Like, he had a legitimate case of being an all-star this season.
Absolutely.
I think if they had a better team record and if Sam Mitchell gave him more minutes, you're talking about an all-star. He'll be an all-star next year. I have no doubt about that.
Exactly. Okay. So, if you want a name, I'm actually gonna go. I'm gonna stick with your Nuggets and say Emmanuel Mudiay. A lot of these other guys have been getting a lot of notoriety. That whole team's kind of a feel-good story. I mean, there's a lot of players playing really well. Danilo Gallinari, like I said in the beginning of the season, he's finally healthy, shooting well. But man, it's a tough position being a point guard in the NBA, especially in the West with all those guys. And he's figuring it out. He's going through his lumps and bumps, but he's been impressive. I think the one guy I'm hearing a little bit less of that I thought I'd hear more of is Mario Hezonja. I think he's the only person, aside from maybe Frank Kaminsky when I'm looking up and down this line, that's a little bit of an outlier from where my expectations lied.
Mm-hmm.
Justin, is there one name?
You know what? Stanley Johnson's impressed me a lot in Detroit.
Yes.
For guys we haven't talked about, averaging about 9 points per game off the bench.
And he's shooting the three.
He's shooting the three. Pretty decent defense for a rookie. Obviously, no rookies are truly great at defense. But I think that's a really well-rounded player that's going to really benefit from being coached under Stan Van Gundy. Probably about 2-3 years away from him breaking out. I kind of see his career taking on a bit of a Jimmy Butler timeline. Maybe not the same ceiling as a Jimmy Butler. That's tough to project on a kid, but he's been really impressive to me.
Yeah, and it's strange and yet impressive that he's wearing Ben Wallace's retired number 3, but we'll leave that for another day.